Story 1. It started on one of those suffocatingly quiet nights, the kind that feels too still to be normal. I was on a double shift at St. Mercy's Hospital, covering for a sick coworker. The hospital, built in the 1940s, had its quirks: flickering lights in the hallways, an outdated wing no one really used, and an elevator that groaned like it carried the weight of centuries. But none of that had ever bothered me before. I was stationed on the 6th floor, primarily reserved for overflow patients, though most of it remained eerily empty. That night, we had only 3 patients up there. I didn't mind the quiet, it was a nice break from the chaos of the ER. Around 2 a.m., I finally had a moment to sit at the nurse's station and scroll through my phone, letting the steady hum of the fluorescent lights lull me into a state of semi-focus. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, like someone softly humming a tune. I froze, my ears straining to catch it again. The melody was familiar but unsettling, an old lullaby my grandmother used to sing when I was a child. At first, I thought it must have been one of the patients, maybe an old woman soothing herself back to sleep. I grabbed my clipboard and did my rounds. Room 601, a young guy recovering from a motorcycle accident, snoring loudly enough to shake the walls. Room 603, an elderly man with pneumonia, fast asleep with an oxygen mask hissing gently. Room 605, empty. That left the humming unexplained. On my way back to the station, I passed room 609, part of the old wing we'd recently reopened. Its door was slightly ajar, and though I'd been told it was empty, the light inside was on. The humming grew louder as I approached room 609. It was unmistakable now, soft, slow, and deliberate. The kind of tune you'd hum to a child to lull them to sleep. My footsteps faltered at the threshold, hand tightening around the clipboard. The light in the room flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the walls. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. No response. I pushed the door open fully, and my breath hitched. The bed was made, crisp white sheets pulled tight, but someone had been in there. A single chair had been pulled to the center of the room, facing the empty bed. On the floor beneath the chair, the faint outline of footprints dragged through a thin layer of dust. I scanned the room quickly, closet empty, bathroom door wide open. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, a chill washed over me, raising every hair on my body. Behind me, the chair shifted. Just slightly. It made the faintest scrape against the floor, the kind of sound you couldn't mistake. I spun around, clipboard held uselessly in front of me, only to see the chair back in its original position. It hadn't moved far. Just an inch. The humming stopped. I didn't linger long enough to investigate further. I darted back to the nurse's station, heart pounding against my ribs. I spent the next hour trying to shake off what I'd seen. I told myself it was the stress of the double shift, that I was overtired and imagining things. But no amount of rationalizing could calm the unease crawling under my skin. At around 3:30 a.m., I decided to check on the patients again. The hall seemed quieter than before, the silence pressing down like a weight. Room 601, the young man, still snoring. Room 603, the elderly man, coughing softly in his sleep. I hesitated when I reached room 605, the one I'd seen was supposed to be empty. This time, the door was shut. I hadn't closed it earlier. I stared at it, willing myself to move, to open the door and prove to myself there was nothing to fear. My hand reached for the handle, but just as my fingers brushed it, I froze. There it was again. The humming. But it wasn't coming from the room. It was behind me. I turned, heart in my throat, and saw the silhouette of a woman at the far end of the hallway. Her back was to me, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to the tune she was softly humming. She wore an old-fashioned hospital gown that fluttered as though caught in a breeze. But the air was perfectly still. "Ma'am?" I croaked, my voice trembling. She stopped humming but didn't turn around. Instead, she slowly started walking toward the old wing of the hospital. I don't know what possessed me to follow her. My legs moved as though on autopilot, the sound of her bare feet padding on the linoleum drawing me closer. She disappeared into room 609. When I reached the door, it was wide open. The chair had been overturned, lying on its side in the middle of the room. But the bed was no longer empty. A figure lay beneath the sheets, its face obscured by the shadows. The humming began again, soft and melodic, but this time, it came from all around me. I stumbled backward into the hall, my breath coming in shallow gasps. As I turned to run, a single thought stopped me cold. Room 609 wasn't supposed to be open. It hadn't been for years, not since the last patient to stay there, a woman named Margaret, had died in that very bed. The same Margaret who had been known for her lullabies, humming them day and night to soothe herself until the very end. I didn't finish my shift. I didn't even grab my things. I ran down the stairs, out of the hospital, and into the parking lot, where I sat in my car until sunrise. The next day, I handed in my resignation. Some nights, when it's quiet and I'm alone, I swear I can still hear it, that lullaby. Soft, slow, and deliberate, carried to me on a chill I'll never forget. Story 2. The assignment seemed straightforward enough. I'd been hired as a night custodian for an old hospital slated to be torn down. St. Augustine's, a relic from the 1930s, had been out of commission for nearly a decade, but vandals and squatters had made their mark, leaving graffiti and broken windows throughout its crumbling halls. My job was to sweep the place clean for its final demolition. The foreman handed me a set of jangling keys on my first night and gave me a simple instruction: avoid the east wing. Structural instability, he said. Don't want you falling through the floor. The hospital was a maze of peeling paint and flickering emergency lights, the air heavy with mildew and dust. My flashlight's beam sliced through the shadows as I trudged down the hallways, my mop and bucket dragging behind me. For the first few hours, it was uneventful. Just the occasional creak of old wood or a distant drip of water. But as the clock crept toward midnight, I began to notice sounds. It started subtly, soft tapping, like footsteps, but too faint to pin down. I chalked it up to the building settling. But then came the whispering. It started in room 214. I'd just finished mopping the floor when I heard it, a low, raspy voice, like someone murmuring just on the other side of the door. Hello. I called, my voice echoing down the empty hall. No reply. I pressed my ear to the door. The whispering continued, faint and unintelligible, like a conversation happening just out of reach. I pushed the door open slowly, the door creaked as it opened, the sound reverberating through the empty hallway behind me. Room 214 was dimly lit by the glow of a single emergency light in the corner, casting long, trembling shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. It was empty, or so I thought at first. The whispering stopped as soon as I stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and decay, like the ghost of a hospital long gone. My flashlight beam danced over the walls, revealing nothing but peeling wallpaper and a rusted hospital bed shoved against the far wall. Then, just as I turned to leave, I heard it again. A single, faint whisper, this time coming from behind me. I whipped around, flashlight trained on the bed, but no one was there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I backed out of the room, my breath coming quicker now, and shut the door behind me. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold, the faint outline of wet footprints leading from room 214 down the hall, toward the east wing. The foreman's words echoed in my mind. Avoid the east wing. But the rational part of me kicked in, insisting it was just water leaking from somewhere. I told myself it wasn't my job to investigate and started to head in the opposite direction. I didn't get far. From somewhere deep in the east wing came the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. Hard. The echo of it rippled through the empty corridors, and before I knew it, I was walking toward it, as though pulled by some invisible thread. The footprints grew fainter the closer I got to the east wing, eventually disappearing entirely just outside a set of double doors. One of the doors was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. My flashlight wavered as I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn back, to leave the doors closed and head back to the safety of the main wing. But the whispering came again, faint and teasing, just beyond the threshold. "Help me." I pushed the door open, the door groaned as it swung open, revealing a pitch-black corridor. My flashlight's beam barely pierced the darkness, casting jittery reflections off broken glass and rusted gurneys abandoned along the walls. The air here felt different, thicker, colder, as if it were weighed down by years of silence. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The whispering stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint hum of my flashlight and my own ragged breathing. Then, from the end of the hallway, something moved. At first, it was just a shadow, flickering briefly at the edge of the light. But as I stepped closer, I saw it, someone crouched on the floor, their back to me. They were rocking slightly, back and forth, their head bobbing as if murmuring to themselves. "Sir. Ma'am. You're not supposed to be here." My voice cracked as I spoke. The figure stopped rocking. Slowly, they began to rise, their movements stiff and unnatural, like a marionette being yanked upright by invisible strings. They turned toward me, but the beam of my flashlight caught only their silhouette. And then I saw the eyes. Wide, staring, too bright for the darkness. They glinted like polished glass, unblinking, locked on me. "Help me," the figure whispered, though their mouth didn't move. The voice seemed to echo from somewhere all around me, filling the corridor. I took a step back, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out. They didn't answer. Instead, they raised one skeletal arm and pointed toward a door at the end of the hallway. The number 313 was stenciled on it in faded black paint. I shook my head, unable to speak. The figure didn't move closer, didn't speak again, just stood there, arm outstretched, waiting. Against every ounce of better judgment, I started walking toward the door. When I reached it, the air around me felt icy, my breath clouding in front of me as I reached for the handle. The figure was still watching, their glowing eyes burning into my back. I pushed the door open, and a foul stench hit me like a physical blow. Inside, the room was in complete disarray, overturned furniture, medical charts scattered across the floor, and a single, decayed hospital bed in the center of the room. And there, lying on the bed, was something that made my stomach turn. It was a body, mummified and shrunken with age, still strapped to the bed by rotting leather restraints. The remains wore a hospital gown, and pinned to it was a faded name tag, Patient 313. I stumbled backward, gagging, and the door slammed shut behind me. Spinning around, I saw that the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, and the whispering had stopped. I didn't wait to find out more. I sprinted out of the east wing, down the stairs, and out of the hospital, leaving my mop and bucket behind. I didn't even bother locking up. The foreman didn't seem surprised when I quit the next morning. He just nodded and said, "Happens to a lot of people." When I pressed him about room 313, he just shook his head. "It's better if you don't know," he said. "But I still hear the whisper sometimes, late at night. Faint and distant, like it's calling me back to that godforsaken place." Story 3. They called it the ghost shift for a reason. As a traveling nurse, I'd worked plenty of strange assignments, but the late-night shift in the ICU of Ridgeview Memorial was something else entirely. The staff joked about it, a harmless nickname for the hours when the hospital felt lifeless and deserted. But the regulars always avoided it if they could, swapping shifts with newer nurses or travelers like me. I didn't think much of it when I signed up. Night shifts were quieter, and I preferred the stillness anyway. Ridgeview was a small hospital, and the ICU had only 8 rooms, most of which were empty that night. By midnight, I had only 2 patients to care for, an elderly woman recovering from surgery and a man in his 50s who'd had a heart attack. I settled into my routine, checking vitals, restocking supplies, and occasionally chatting with the other nurse on duty, Olivia. Around 1:30 a.m., Olivia went on her break, leaving me alone at the nurse's station. I busied myself reviewing charts, letting the hum of machines fill the silence. Then, the call light in room 7 lit up. I frowned. Room 7 was supposed to be empty. At first, I thought it might be a malfunction. It wasn't unusual for the older equipment in hospitals like Ridgeview to glitch. Still, protocol was protocol. I grabbed my clipboard and headed down the dimly lit hall toward the room. The air felt heavier as I approached, the kind of oppressive stillness that presses down on you like a weight. When I reached the door, it was shut, but the small window in the door showed the room inside. The bed was made, the lights dim, just as I'd left it earlier in the evening. I opened the door cautiously. "Hello?" I asked, stepping inside. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the ICU, and not in the way air conditioning makes a room chilly. This cold felt unnatural, seeping into my skin and setting every nerve on edge. The bed was empty, but the call button lay on the nightstand, the cord stretched across the mattress as though someone had pulled it from the bed just moments ago. I reached out to grab the cord, but before my fingers could close around it, the light above the bed flickered. "Hello?" I said again, my voice unsteady now. "Is someone here?" The only reply was the faint, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Except there wasn't supposed to be a heart monitor in room 7. I froze, every instinct telling me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. The beeping was faint, rhythmic, unmistakable, the steady cadence of a functioning heart monitor. But there was no monitor in room 7, no patient hooked up to any machine. I turned toward the corner of the room where the sound seemed to be coming from. Shadows pooled there, darker than they should have been in the soft glow of the overhead light. "Olivia?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper, hoping she had come back from her break and was playing a prank. No answer. The sound grew louder, more insistent, the tempo picking up. Beep beep beep. It was fast now, panicked, as if the unseen patient's heart was racing. I took a step back toward the door, and that's when I saw it, a faint impression on the bed. The pristine white sheets began to crease, as though someone, or something, was sitting down. The indent deepened, shifting slightly, and the air around me grew even colder. My breath fogged in front of me, the chill biting into my skin. I backed into the door, heart pounding in my chest. The beeping stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. That's when I noticed the shadow. It was faint at first, just a flicker in the corner of my eye. But when I turned my head, it was there, tall and angular, darker than the rest of the room, standing at the foot of the bed. It didn't move, but I could feel it watching me, its presence suffocating and wrong in a way I can't put into words. My hand fumbled for the door handle behind me, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. I pulled the door open and stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. "Olivia!" I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty corridor. Her footsteps came quickly from the break room, her face pale and concerned. "What's wrong?" "There's someone in room 7, I stammered, struggling to catch my breath. The call light went off. The bed, there was an indent. And the shadow. I stopped. How could I explain what I'd seen without sounding insane? Olivia's face changed, her expression going from worry to something else. Something darker. "We don't go into room 7, she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder as though someone might overhear. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. Because room 7 hasn't had a patient since the accident, she said. The night nurse, 3 years ago, she fell asleep on her shift. When she woke up, the patient was gone. The door locked from the inside. They found her hours later, still in the room, but, Olivia hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. She wouldn't talk about what happened. She left the hospital the next day and never came back. I stared at her, my blood running cold. So why is it still used? It's not, Olivia replied. We've tried to close it off, but, things keep happening. Before I could respond, the call light for room 7 lit up again, casting an eerie glow in the dim hallway. The call light for room 7 glowed like an accusation in the darkened hallway. My pulse quickened as Olivia and I exchanged uneasy glances. We should just leave it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to walk away. But something in the pit of my stomach twisted, a nagging, terrible curiosity that wouldn't let go. I can't, I whispered back. What if someone, really is in there? Olivia shook her head but didn't stop me as I stepped forward. The hallway felt impossibly long, every step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the door, my fingers trembled so badly I could barely grip the handle. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open again. The bed was empty now, perfectly made, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above. I stepped inside, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing. No shadow, no heartbeat, no figure at the bed. Just the suffocating cold that clung to the room like a second skin. Then I noticed something that hadn't been there before, a clipboard lying on the floor by the foot of the bed. Slowly, I bent to pick it up. The surface was blank, save for one word scrawled across it in jagged, uneven letters, help. The door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding, but the door wouldn't budge. I yanked on the handle, my breath coming in panicked gasps. Olivia! I screamed, pounding on the door. The light above me flickered wildly, casting the room in disorienting bursts of shadow and light. And then I saw it. In the reflection of the window, something stood behind me. It was the shadow again, taller now, its edges rippling unnaturally like smoke. Its eyes were gone, replaced by twin voids of blackness that seemed to pull the air from the room. Help me, it whispered, but this time the voice was layered, like it came from a dozen mouths speaking in unison. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I pressed myself against the door, my hands clawing at the handle until it finally gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, collapsing onto the cold tile. The light in room 7 flickered once, then went out entirely. Olivia was there in an instant, pulling me to my feet. What happened? Are you okay? I shook my head, unable to speak. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't let go of the clipboard. She pried it from my grip, her face paling as she read the single word written on it. We didn't go back into room 7 that night. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. I never went back to Ridgeview, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I dream of that room. The shadow. The whisper. And when I wake, the word help lingers in my mind like a brand, as if whatever was in that room is still waiting for someone to answer its call.